Chapter 17 of The Mystery Girl by Carolyn Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. Planning an Elopement. There was some sort of telepathy or some subconscious impulse that made Anita Austin open her bedroom door in response to a light tap, although she had resolved to talk to nobody just then. But when she saw Gordon Lockwood, she was glad she had, and, without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside the room and closed the door. He looked at her with a face full of compassion and love, but he spoke as one who must attend to an important business. "Anita," he said, speaking very low, "the crisis has come. They have learned of the check Dr. Waring gave you that night, and it is the last straw. Stone is already, I think, convinced of your guilt, and that young chap, McGuire, will get at the bottom of everything, I'm sure." "Check? What do you mean?" Miss Mystery said, with a blank look on her face. "Don't equivocate with me, dear." Lockwood laid his hand gently on hers. "There's no time now to tell you of my love, as I want to tell it. Now we can only assume that it is all told, that we are engaged, and that we are to be married at once. We are going to elope, Anita." "Elope?" She stared at him, but her eyes grew soft, and her pale cheeks flushed. "What do you mean?" "It isn't a pretty word," Gordon smiled. "But it's the only thing to do, you see. If you stay here, you'll be arrested. If you go, I go with you. So we both go, and that makes it an elopement." "But, Gordon—" "But, Anita, answer me just one question. Do you love me?" "Yes," with an adorable upward glance and smile. "More than you love Dr. Waring?" Their eyes met. Lockwood's usually inscrutable face was desperately eager, and his deep eyes showed smoldering passion. He held her by the shoulders. He looked steadily at her, awaiting her answer. "Yes," she said at last, her lovely lips quivering. "That's all I want to know," he whispered, triumphantly, as he kissed the scarlet lips and drew the slender form into his embrace. "You must know more," she began, and I can't tell you. Oh, Gordon—" She hid her face on his broad shoulder, and he gently stroked her hair as he said, "Don't tell me anything now, dearest. Don't ever tell me, unless you choose. And anyway, I know it all. I know you had never known the doctor before, and I'll tell you how I know. I found in his scrap basket a note to you." "A note to me?" Fresh terror showed in the dark eyes. "Yes. Don't mind. No one else ever saw it. I burned it. But it said, 'Darling Anita, since you came into my life, life is worth living,' or something like that." When did he write that?" "Sometime on that fatal Sunday. I suppose after he met you in the afternoon, and before you came that evening. Remember, sweetheart, if ever you want to tell me all about that late visit to him, do so. But if not, I shall never ask or expect you to. But that's all in the future, our dear future, which we shall spend together. Together, Anita. Are you glad?" "Oh, so glad!" and the soft arms crept around his neck, and Miss Mystery gave him a kiss that thrilled his very soul. "Will you take care of me, Gordon?" "Take care of you, my little love? Take care of you, is it? Just give me the chance." "You seem to have a pretty big chance right now." A smiling face reached up to his. "But—" she seemed suddenly to recollect something. "About a check. He didn't give me a check." Lockwood laid a hand over her mouth. "Hush, dearest! Don't tell me things that aren't so. I saw the stub. A check for $10,000, made out to Anita Austin, and dated that very Sunday. Now hush!" As she began to speak, "we've no time to talk these things over. I tell you the police are on your track. They will come here. They will arrest you. Try to get that in your head. I am going to save you, first for your own sweet sake, and also for my own." "But, Gordon, wait a minute. Do you believe I killed John Waring?" Lockwood looked at her. "Don't ask me that, Anita. And truly, I don't know whether I believe it or not. I know you have told falsehoods. I know you were there that night. I know of his letter to you, of the check, and of the ruby pin and the money. But no, I do not know that you killed him. There are many other theories possible. There's Nogi. But, my darling, it all makes no difference. I love you. I want you, whatever the circumstances or conditions of your life, or your deeds. I love you so that I want you even if you are a criminal, for in that case I want to protect and save you. Now don't tell me you did or didn't kill the man, for—" he gave her a whimsical smile, "I couldn't believe you in either case. I've not much opinion of your veracity, and, too, it's too big a matter to talk about now. Of course, I don't believe you killed him. You, my little love. And yet the evidence is so overpowering that I believe you did kill him. There, how's that for a platform? Now, let all those things be, and get ready to go away with me. I tell you we're going to elope, and mighty quickly, too. The difficulty is, to get away unseen. But it must be done. Pack a small handbag, a very small one. I'll plan your way out, and if we can make a getaway under the noses of Stone and his boy, we'll soon be all right. I've a friend who will motor us to a nearby town, where a dear old minister, who has known and loved me from boyhood, will marry us." "Doesn't he know about me?" "My little girl, leave all the details of this thing to me. Don't bother your lovely head about it. It'll be all right, trust me, if we can escape." "Is it right for me to go? Oughtn't I stay and—what do they call it—give myself up?" "Anita, if I didn't love you so, I'd scold you hard. Now, you obey your future lord and master, and get ready for a hurry-up wedding. I'm sorry that you can't have bridesmaids and choir boys. But you'll pardon me, I know, if I remind you that that isn't my fault." Miss Mystery looked up and broke into laughter. Truly, she was a mystery. Her gaiety was as spontaneous and merry as if she had never heard of crime or tragedy. Lockwood gazed at her curiously, and then nodded his handsome head as he said, "You'll do, Anita. You're a little bit of all right." But in a moment her mood changed. "Gordon, we can't," she said slowly. "We never can get away from this house, let alone the detectives. Miss Bascom is on continual watch, and Mrs. Adams—" "I know, dear. That's it. I thought if you could manage that part, I'd see to evading the Stone faction. Can't you think up a plan?" "Love will find a way," she whispered, and, unable to resist the inviting smile, Gordon again caught her in his arms and held her close in an ecstasy of possession. "You are so sweet," he murmured, with an air of saying something important. "Oh, my little girl, how I love you! The moment I first saw you—" "When was that?" "That night at the doctor's lectures. I sat behind you. I changed my seat to do so. And I counted the buttons on your dear little gray frock. That was one way I discovered your presence in the study that night." He spoke gravely now. "And there was another way. I heard you talking. Yes, I heard your blessed voice. Remember, I loved you then, and I heard Waring talking to you. I could make out no word, I didn't try. But now I wish I had, for it might help you." "I wish you had, Gordon," she returned solemnly. "It would have helped me." "But you can tell me, dear, tell me all the conversation. Surely you trust me now." "I trust you, but, oh, as you say, there's no time. It's a long story, a dreadful story. I don't want to tell you—" "Then you shan't. I've promised you that, you know. Not until you want to tell me will I ask for a word of it. Now, here's another thing," and Anita blushed deeply. "If we go away, as you say, what about money?" Lockwood stared at her. "I have money," he said. "Why do you ask that?" But the awful detective people said you were terribly in debt." "Brave little girl to say that. I know you hated to. Well, my darling, those precious bills that those precious detectives dug up in my desk are old bills that were owned by my father. His name was the same as mine." "The same as yours? How queer." "Oh, not a unique instance. Anyway, those bills I am paying off as I can. I'm not legally responsible for them, but I want to clear my dad's name, and all that. Now, all that can wait, while I take unto me a wife, and arrange for her comfort and convenience. But is there—now remember, I'm not prying—is there anyone whose permission you must ask to marry me?" "No, I'm 21. That's of age in any state." "Why, you aged person! I deemed you about 18. "Do you mind?" "No, you goosie. But your mother, now?" "Oh, my mother, she doesn't care what I do." "And your father? Forgive me, but I have to ask." "My father is dead." "Then come along. Let's begin to get ready to go." "Wait a minute, Gordon. To get married, must I tell my real name?" His eyes clouded a trifle. "Yes, dear heart," he said, very gently. "Yes, you must." "Then I can't get married, Gordon." Miss Mystery sat down and folded her little hands in her lap, her whole attitude that of utter despair. "But, sweetheart, no one need know except the minister and witnesses." "And you?" "Yes, and I." "Oh, I can't marry you anyway. I can't marry anybody. I can't tell who I am. Oh, let them take me away, let them arrest me, and I hope they'll convict me, and—" "Hush, my precious girl, hush!" Lockwood took her in his arms, and let her stifle her sobs on his breast. He was bewildered. What was the truth about this strange child? For in her abandonment of grief, Anita seemed a very child, a tortured, irresponsible soul whose only haven was in the arms now around her. "You will go with me anyway, Anita," he said, with an air of authority. "I must take care of you. We will go as I planned. The minister I told you of is a great and good man. He will advise you—" "Oh, no, I don't want to talk to a minister." "Yes, you do. And his wife is a dear, good woman. They will take you into their hearts and home, and then we can all decide what to do. At any rate, you must get away from here. Come now, pack your bag. And would you mind, Anita, if I ask you not to take the money and the ruby pin?" "But he gave them to me. I tell you, Gordon, John Waring gave me those of his own free will." "Because of his affection for you?" "Yes, for no other reason. I will keep the pin anyway. I will." "Anita, have you any idea how you puzzle me? How you torture me? Well, take what you like. Will you get ready now, and I will let you know as soon as I can how and when we can start." A loud rap was followed by an immediate opening of the door, and Mrs. Adams came into the room. She stared at Lockwood, but made no comment on his presence there. "Miss Austen," she began, "I do not wish you to stay in my house any longer. I have kept you until now because my husband was so sorry for you, and refused to turn you out. Nor am I turning you out, but I wish you would leave us alone, Mr. Lockwood." Gordon started to speak, but Anita interrupted him. "Go, please," she said quietly, and Lockwood obeyed. "I cannot blame you, Mrs. Adams," Miss Mystery said. "I dare say you have to consider your other boarders, and I thank you for your kindness and forbearance you have shown me so far." The tears were in the big dark eyes, and even as they moved Mrs. Adams to sympathy, she also wondered if they were real. "A girl who would redden her lips would be capable of any deceit and duplicity," Esther Adams reasoned. But she went on calmly. "I come now, Miss Austen, to tell you that Mr. Trask is downstairs and wants to see you. He wants you to go to his house to stay. The Peytons are there, of course, and he offers you the shelter of his roof and protection until this dreadful matter is settled up." "Mr. Trask!" Anita looked her amazement. "Yes. Now don't be silly. You very well know he is mad about you, and he hopes to get you freed and then marry you." "Oh, he does!" It was the old, scornful Miss Mystery who spoke. "Well, will you please tell him from me—" "Now, don't you be too hoity-toity, miss. You're mighty lucky to have a home offered you." "Yes, that's quite true. Well, Mrs. Adams, will you go down then and say I'll be down in a moment or two? Give me time to freshen my appearance a bit." "Yes, with paints and powders and cosmetics," Esther Adams grumbled to herself as she went down the stairs. As a matter of fact, she quite misjudged the girl. Very rarely did Anita resort to artificial aid of that sort, but when she so desired, she used it as she would any other personal adornment. "She's coming down," Mrs. Adams announced, as she returned to Trask, and they waited. But when the minutes grew to a quarter of an hour, and then nearly to a half, Mrs. Adams again climbed the stairs to hasten proceedings. This time she found the room empty. The absence, too, of brushes and combs, the disappearance of a small suitcase, and the fact that her hat and coat were gone, all pointed unmistakably to the assumption that the girl had fled. "Well," Mrs. Adams reported, "she's lit out, bag and baggage." "Gone!" exclaimed Trask in dismay. "Well, she isn't in her room. Her trunk is locked and strapped, and her suitcase is missing. Her hat and coat's gone, too, so you can make your own guess." But Maurice Trask didn't stay there to make his guess. He went back home as fast as he could and told Fleming Stone the news. "Run away, has she?" said Stone. "I rather looked for that." "You did, and took no steps to prevent it? You're a nice detective, you are." Well, if you're so smart, where'd she go? Where's Lockwood? Was Stone's laconic response. Lockwood? Exclaimed Trask. Wherever he is, he hasn't run off with Anita Austin. If he has, by Jove, I'll break every bone in his body. You'll have to catch him first, smiled the detective. I'll catch him. I'll set you to do it. And looky here, if she's gone off with that man, you can go ahead and catch her, catch them both, and then go ahead and prove her guilty. Is she? Is she? You bet she is, and I know it. How do you know? I'll tell you. I know her eyebrows. So do I know her eyebrows, but they don't tell me she's a murderer. Well, they tell me that. It's this way. Her eyebrows are not only heavy and dark, but they almost meet over the bridge of her nose. Darling nose, put in Fibsy, who was interested in Anita, but not in Trask's deductions. Does your knowledge of physiognomy tell you that those meeting eyebrows are a sign of a criminal? Asked Stone. Nothing of that sort, but they are the Truesdell brows. The Truesdell brows? Stone raised his own. Sounds like a proprietary article. Not artificial, are they? Now, see here, Mr. Stone. I'm in no mood to be guyed. Those eyebrows are frequently seen in the Truesdell family. My grandfather's brother married a Truesdell. Your grandfather's brother married a Truesdell, and your own grandfather didn't? No, I haven't those brows. Well, you're not entitled to them, having no Truesdell blood in your veins. But that girl has. Indeed. Interesting, is it not? Aw, come off that line of talk, F.S., said Frisbee, knitting his brows, which were not Truesdellian. I'm seeing a chink o' light. The brother of your grandfather now, Mr. Trask, he was named... Waring, of course. Henry Waring. My grandfather was James Waring. And this Henry Waring, he was the father of Dr. John Waring? As Frisbee said this, Stone sat upright and gazed hard at Trask. Yes, John Waring's father was Henry, and my grandfather was Henry's brother, James. That's how I'm related. And being the only one, that's why I'm the heir here. But don't you see, Dr. Waring's mother was a Truesdell. And Miss Austin is a relative of hers. A connection of the Truesdell family, somehow, exclaimed the now excited Fibsy. And she found out about it, and came here, and... Yes, Trask said, and tried to get some money from John Waring on the ground of relationship. What relation could she be? Maybe a niece of Dr. Waring, or a cousin. Maybe the same relation to Dr. Waring's mother that I am to his father. Then that would explain his giving her money and the pin. And maybe she burnt the will. And then she... But it complicates everything, said Stone, who was thinking quickly. However, if Miss Austin is connected with the Truesdell family, it gives us a way to look to learn her history. We'll learn it, said Trask abruptly. I'm not afraid of losing my inheritance, for I'm in the direct Waring line, and she can't be. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of The Mystery Girl by Carolyn Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. Miss Mystery No Longer. Trask, helped along by Fleming Stone, investigated the family tree of the Warings. But they ran up against a blank wall. As far as they could learn, Dr. Waring never had brother or sister. His mother, who was a Truesdell, had also been an only child. But, of course, Miss Mystery could be of the Truesdell family, and could, as Trask observed, be the same relation to John Waring's mother that Trask was to John Waring's father, which relation was that of second cousin. "It gives a reason for the girl's presence here," Stone said. "And as it's the only reason we can think of, it must be followed up." "And I'll follow it up," Trask said, "if I once get hold of that girl. Where can she be, Mr. Stone?" "Not very far away, I think, as all the stations and routes out of town are watched. She'd have trouble to leave Corinth." "She could get out in a motor car." "Who'd take her?" "Lockwood, of course." But just then Gordon Lockwood came into the Waring study. His usual calm was entirely gone, his eyes wildly staring, and his voice quivered as he said, "She's gone! Anita's gone!" "Yes, I know it. I thought you went with her," and Stone stared in turn. "No, I didn't," Lockwood said, quite unnecessarily. "Find her, Mr. Stone. You can, can't you?" "I can find her," said Fibsy, "if you tell me one thing, Mr. Lockwood, right straight out." "What is it? I'll tell you anything. I'm afraid—" "You're afraid she's killed herself," said Fibsy, calmly. "Well, you tell me this. Are you two—you know—" The boy blushed, and Stone smiled a little as he said, "McGuire is a bit shy of romantic matters. He means, are you and Miss Austin lovers?" "We are," said Lockwood, emphatically. "She is my fiancée." "All right," said Fibsy. "Then I'll find her. She hasn't done anything rash in that case." He wagged his wise little head. "Where is she?" Stone asked, confident that the boy could tell. He knew of Fibsy's almost clairvoyant powers of divining truth in certain situations. "Want her here?" he asked laconically. "Yes." "I'll get her." Snatching his cap, he darted from the house, but he was closely followed by Maurice Trask. Lockwood would have stopped Trask, but Stone said, "Let him go. This thing is coming to a crisis. Trask will help it along." Fibsy went toward the Adams house, but stopped at the house next door to it. This was the home of Emily Bates. Ringing that lady's doorbell, Fibsy asked to see her. "Mrs. Bates," he said politely, while Trask listened, "we want to see Miss Austin, please." "Anita?" said Mrs. Bates, flurriedly. "Why, she isn't—" "Oh, yes, she is here," said the boy, patiently, rather than rudely. "We have to see her, you see." "Here I am," said Miss Mystery, coming in from the next room. "I think," she said, turning to Mrs. Bates, "I think, as you advised me, I'll tell all." "Don't tell it here," cried Fibsy. "Please, Miss Austin, don't spill your yarn here. Oh, I mean don't divulge—" The unusual word nearly choked the excited boy, who always, in moments of strong emotion, lapsed into careless English, but who tried not to. "Now look here," Maurice Trask put in. "Here's where I take hold. Miss Austin, you have told your story to Mrs. Bates?" "Yes," said Anita, looking very sad, but determined. "Then you tell it to me. I'm heir to the Waring estate, and so I have a right to know all you know about—the family." His knowing look proved to Anita that he assumed also her right to be classed with "the family," and she looked at him in astonishment. "You know?" she cried. "Yes, I know." He spoke very sternly. "And I insist upon a private interview with you before you tell your story to anyone else." "You shall have it, then," she said, and her eyes grew grave. "Mrs. Bates, will you and Terence leave us alone for 10 minutes? That will be long enough, and then I'll go to see Mr. Stone, if necessary." "Now look here," Trask said, as the door closed after the others. "I know who you are." "I don't believe it," and Miss Mystery looked at him straight from beneath the Truesdell brows. "Well, anyway, I know you are a Truesdell connection." "Yes, I am. Go on." "I don't know just what branch," he went on, a little lamely. "But it's a branch strong enough to hold me, and also to interfere with this heirship of yours." "Can't be. There's no Truesdell so close to John Waring as I am." "You think so? Then listen." As Miss Mystery told him her story, the man's face fell. He sat, almost petrified with astonishment, and when she had finished the short but amazing recital, he said, "My heavens! What are you going to do?" "I don't know what to do." "If you tell, I—" "Of course you do." "And if you don't tell, then John Waring's name is left unstained." "There is no shadow of stain on John Waring's name. What do you mean?" "Now, look here, Miss Austin, you keep quiet about all this, will you? I'll call off those sleuths, and I'll arrange to close up and cover up the whole matter. Then you marry me—there's only a distant cousinship between us—and I'll put up the biggest memorial to Waring you ever heard of." "Omit the clause about my marrying you," she returned, "and I may agree to your plans. I haven't quite decided what to do. And, beside, Mr. Trask, who killed Dr. Waring?" "Never mind who killed him. Call it suicide. It must have been, anyway." "No. I'm not sure it was. Oh, I don't know what to do." "Time's up," called Fibsy through the closed door. "And, I say, Miss Austin, you take my tip and come along and tell your story to F. Stone. It'll be your best bet in the long run." Perhaps it was the boy's speech, perhaps it was the gleam of disappointed greed that Anita saw in Trask's eyes, but she rose, with a sudden decision, and said, as she opened the door, "That's just what I'll do. Come with me, Mrs. Bates, or would you rather not?" "Oh, I can't," said Emily Bates. "Don't ask me, Anita, dear." "No, you stay here. I'll come back soon." And so Miss Mystery again walked across the snow-covered field to the Waring house, this time to remove all occasion for using her nickname. "You found her?" said Stone, as the trio came into the study, where he and Lockwood still sat. "Yes," said Fibsy. "I just thought, where would a poor, hunted kid go? And I said to myself, she'd go to the nearest and nicest lady's house she knew of. And of course that was Mrs. Bates's, and sure enough there she was. And she's going to tell all." Fibsy was melodramatic by nature, and his gesture indicated an important revelation. "I am," said Anita, quietly. She went straight to Lockwood's side, and he took her hand calmly and led her to a seat on the wide davenport, then sat beside her. Her hand still in his, she told her story. "I am of the Truesdell blood," she began, "as Mr. Trask surmised. But also I am of Waring blood. Dr. John Waring was my father." No one spoke. The surprise was too great. In his wildest theories, Fleming Stone had never thought of this. Fibsy's great astonishment was permeated with the quick conviction, "Then she didn't kill him!" Gordon Lockwood was conscious of a rapturous reassurance that he had no rival as a lover. Trask, already knowing the truth, sat gloomily realizing he was not the heir. Anita, her beautiful face sad, yet proud to acknowledge her ancestry, went on. "This is his story. When John Waring was 20 years old, he met a young woman, an actress, who so infatuated him that he married her. They were absolutely uncongenial and unfitted for one another, and after a few weeks they agreed to separate. There was no question of divorce, they merely preferred to live apart. He sent her money, at stated intervals, but he pursued his quiet, studious life, and she her life of gaiety and sport. She was a good woman. She is a good woman. She is my mother." Another silence followed this disclosure. "Is," she had said, "not was. And John Waring her father." Gordon Lockwood held her hand closely. He was content to listen. Whatever she could say could not lessen his love and adoration. "I tell you this for her sake, and my father's also. There is no stigma to be attached to either. They were merely so utterly opposite in character and disposition that they could not live together. As I said, after a few weeks they separated, and my father did not know of my birth. My mother would not let him know, lest he come back to her. She was a light-hearted, carefree girl, and while she loved me, she did not love my father. Later on, when I was about 4, I think, she caused a notice of her death to be sent to my father. This was because she wanted to sever all connections and take no chance of ever meeting him again. She was at that time a successful actress, and earned all the money she wanted. She adored me. She had no love affairs. She lived only for me and her art. Though a good actress, she was not widely renowned, and in California, where she had chosen to make her home, she was liked and respected. The climate just suited her love of ease, freedom, and indolence, as a New England life of busy activity would have been impossible to her. I want you to understand my mother. She is, a mere butterfly, caring only for trifles and simple gaiety. Her home is charming, her personality that of a delightful child. But her temperament is one that cannot stand responsibilities and chafes at demands. However, all that matters little. The facts are that John Waring, learning of his wife's death, devoted himself utterly to his books and his study. When my mother saw in the papers he was about to marry, she was appalled. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't let him marry another woman, unaware of her existence. She couldn't raise a question of divorce, for she knew that would tend to reflect unpleasantly on his past. And, too, at last, she was beginning to feel as if she might like to resume her position as his wife, now that he was prominent and wealthy. She told me the whole story, of which I had been utterly ignorant, and she sent me here. I was to see Dr. Waring and use my own judgment as to when and how I should tell him all this. I came here with a feeling of dislike and resentment toward a father who had been no father to me. Mother exonerated him, to be sure, but it was all such a surprise to me that I accepted the errand in a spirit of bravado, and was prepared to make trouble if necessary. But when I saw John Waring, when I realized that splendid man was my father, I knew that all my love, all my allegiance was his, and that my mother was as nothing to me, compared with my wonderful father. Except for what Mr. Trask calls the Truesdell brows, I look exactly like my mother. Also, she resumed her maiden name of Anita Austin after they separated. So you may imagine the shock when Dr. Waring first heard the name, and first saw the living image of his wife, whom, you must remember, he supposed dead. But I had my mission to perform, and so I came here that Sunday night. The audience sat motionless. Lockwood, holding her hand, felt every tremor of her emotion as the girl told her story. Fleming Stone, realizing that he was hearing the most dramatic revelation of his career, listened avidly. Fibsy, with staring eyes and open mouth, clenched his fist in enthralled interest, and Maurice Trask heard it all with ever-growing conviction that he must give up his supposed inheritance. As Anita began to tell of that Sunday night, the situation became even more tense. I came to the French window and tapped lightly. Dr. Waring let me in, and I sat by him in that plush chair. The conversation I had with my father I shall not detail. It is my most sacred and beloved memory. We were as one in every way. We loved each other from the first word. We proved to be alike in our tastes and pursuits. Oh, if he could have lived! I told him of my mother and myself, and he was crushed. I wanted to spare him, but what could I do? He had to know, although the knowing meant the ruining of his career. He said at once he could not take the presidency of the college, with the story of his past made public, nor could he honorably suppress it. He couldn't marry Mrs. Bates, nor could he install my mother as mistress here. He had done no real wrong in making that early and ill-advised marriage, but it seemed to him a blot on his scutcheon, and an indelible one. He would sit and brood over these fearful conditions. Then, suddenly, he would realize my existence afresh, and rejoice in it. He loved me at once and deeply, and I adored him. Never father and daughter, I am sure, crowded a lifetime of affection into such a few moments. Bravely Anita went on, not daring to pause to think. Her hand, tightly clasped in Lockwood's, trembled, but her voice was steady, for it was her opportunity to clear her father's name, and she must neglect no slightest point. At last he told me I must go away, and he would think out what he could do. He gave me the money, for he was afraid I hadn't sufficient cash with me, and he gave me the ruby pin, saying I must keep it forever as my father's first gift to me. With infinite gentleness he bade me good-bye, and softly opened the glass door for me. I went away, and he closed the door. I went home to the Adams house, making, of course, those footprints in the snow. It was a very cold night. I remember the clear, shining stars, but I thought of nothing but my father, my splendid, wonderful father. And I hoped, oh, how I hoped, that some way would be found that he and I could spend our lives together. I didn't know what he would do, but I prayed to God that some way out might be found. The rest you know. Of the manner of my father's death I know nothing at all. Of Nogi I have no knowledge. I kept all this secret at first, because I hoped to shield my father's name better that way. But I think now it's better told. I couldn't live under the weight of such a secret. One more word as to my mother. She has had an admirer for many years, named Carl Melrose. She has kept him at a distance, but, as you know from the telegram she sent me, she has already either married him or promised to. Also, she advised me to tell the whole truth. I have done so. Unheeding the others, Lockwood put his arm around the exhausted girl as she fell over toward him. His wonderful calm helped her, and his gentle yet firm embrace gave her fresh courage to endure the strain. "Thank you, Miss Austen," and Stone spoke almost reverently. "You have shown marvelous wisdom and bravery, and I congratulate you on your entire procedure. You are an exceptional girl, and I am proud to know you." This was a great deal for Fleming Stone to say, and Anita acknowledged it with a grateful glance. Fibsy, his eyes streaming with unchecked tears, came over and knelt before her. "Oh, Miss Austen," he sobbed. "Oh, Miss Anita." Trask alone remained unmoved, and sat with folded arms and frowning face. But little attention was paid him, and Stone said, thoughtfully, "Our problem of the mystery of Dr. Waring's death is as great as ever." "It is," agreed Lockwood, "but I am sure now, Mr. Stone, that it was a suicide. The motive is supplied, for I knew Dr. Waring so well, I knew the workings of his great and good mind, and I am sure that he felt there was no other course for him. I can see just how he decided that the exposure of all this would react against the reputation of the college, that the sensation and scandal that would fill the papers would harm the standing of the University of Corinth, and that alone caused his decision. I know him so well that I can tell you that never, never would he take his life to save himself trouble or sorrow, but for others' sake, and I include Mrs. Bates, he made the sacrifice. I can see, and I am sure of what I say, how he realized that the press and the public would forgive and condone a dead man, when, if he lived, the brunt of the whole matter would fall on his beloved college and on the woman he loved and respected. Now, as I feel sure he foresaw, such of this story as must be made public will have far less weight and prominence than if he were alive. I know all this is so, for I knew John Waring as few people knew him." A grateful glance from John Waring's daughter thanked him for this tribute. "That $10,000 check?" Trask said, suddenly, for his mind was still concerned with the financial side. "I think that must have been sent to my mother," said Anita. "She, as I told you, returned to the use of her maiden name, and during our interview, my father told me he should write her at once and send her money. I feel sure he did do so." "Without doubt," Lockwood said, "and if so, the letter would have been mailed with the collection next morning. The returning voucher will show." "Also, the letter he wrote my mother will corroborate all I have told you," said Anita, and both her assertion and Gordon's later came true. "I felt," Anita said, by way of further explanation, "that Mrs. Bates ought to know all. So when Mrs. Adams practically put me out of her house, and I had no wish to accept Mr. Trask's invitation to come over here, nor," she smiled affectionately at Lockwood, "could I fall in with your crazy plans. I just went next door and told Mrs. Bates all about it. She was very dear and sweet to me, and now, if you please, I will go back there. I am weary and exhausted. I cannot stand any more. But when you want me, I can be found at Mrs. Bates's. I leave all matters to be decided or settled in the hands of Mr. Lockwood and Mr. Stone. Fibsy, dear, will you escort me home?" With a suddenly acquired dignity, Fibsy rose and stood by her side, and in a moment the two went away together. When the boy returned, the others were absorbed in the discussion of the mysterious death of John Waring. "I'm inclined to give it up," Fleming Stone said, thinking deeply. "Don't do it, F. Stone," Fibsy said, earnestly. "It's better to find out. You never have gave up a case." "Well, Fibs, which way shall we look?" A strange embarrassment came over the boy's face, and then he said diffidently, "Say, gentlemen, could I be left alone in this room for a little while? I don't say I can find out anything, but I do want to try." The lapse into careless enunciation told Stone how much in earnest his young colleague was, and he rose, saying, "You certainly may, my boy. The rest of us will have a conference in some other room, as to what part of Miss Austen's story must be made public." Left to himself, Fibsy went at once to the bookcase that held the defaced copy of Marshall that John Waring had been reading the night he died. Opening the volume at the blood-stained page, the unlettered boy eagerly read the lines. Tried to read them, rather, and groaned in spirit because he knew no Latin. Small wonder that he was nonplussed, for this was all he read. Marshall's Epigrams. Liber 4, Epigram duodirigenti. Qua vicina pluit Vispanis, porta columnis, et madis assiduo, lubricus imbre lapis, in lugulum pueri, qui rascida tecta subibat, decidit hiberno, praegraves undagilu, cumque perigiset miseri crudilia fata, tabuit in calido vulnera, mucro tener, quid non saeva sibi vulvit fortina licera, aut ubi non mors est, si iugulatis aquae. His chin in his hands, he pored over the Latin in utter despair, and, rising, started for the door. Then he paused. "I must do it myself," he murmured. "I must." So he hunted the shelves until he found a Latin dictionary. He was not entirely unversed in the rudiments of the language, for Stone had directed his education at such odd hours as he could find time for study. And so, after some hard and laborious digging, Fibsy at last gathered the gist of the Latin stanza. His eyes shone, and he stared about the room. "It ain't possible," he told himself. "And yet, gee, there ain't nothing else possible." He rose and looked out at every window. He noted carefully the catches. He paced from the desk to the small rear window of the room and back again. "It's the only thing," he reiterated. "The only thing. Oh, gee, what a thing!" He went in search of Stone, and found the three men shut in the living room, and with them was Nogi. Stone's persevering efforts, by advertisements and circulars, had at last succeeded, and the impassive and noncommittal Japanese was there, and quite willing to tell all he knew. Fibsy interrupted his story. Go back," he directed, "to the beginning. Let me hear it all. It's okay, F.S." "I was attending to my dining room duties," Nogi said, "and I had taken the water tray to the study. I was weary and hoped the master would soon retire. So I occasionally peeped through the small window from the dining room. I saw a lady come and make a visit, and then I saw her and I heard her go away. Then I hoped the master would go to bed, but no, he was very busy. He wrote letters, he burned some papers. He moved about much. He was restless, disturbed. Then he sat at his desk and read his book." "This one?" cried Fibsy, excitedly waving the Marshal. "I think so. One like that, anyway." "This was the one. Go on." "Then, oh, it was strange. Then the master got up, went to the small window at the back of the room—" "Which one?" "The one by the big globe, and he opened it, but for a moment—" "Did he put his hand out?" Fibsy cried. "Yes, I suppose to see if it rained. Yes, he put his hand out for a moment, then he closed the window." "And locked it?" asked Fibsy. "It locks itself, with a snap catch. Then, here is the strange thing. Then he went back, sat at his desk, and in a moment he fell over, and the blood spurted out." "Didn't he stab himself?" Fibsy asked. "I don't know. He didn't seem to do anything but scratch his ear, and over he fell. Such a sight! I was afraid, and I ran away, fast." "All very well," said Stone, "but what became of the weapon?" "I know," Fibsy almost screamed, in his excitement. "Oh, F. Stone, I know." "Well, tell us, Terence. But steady now, my boy. Don't get too excited." "No, sir," and the lad grew suddenly quiet. "But I know. Wait just a minute, sir. Where are the photographs of the house that the detectives took the day after?" "I'll get them," Lockwood said, and left the room. He returned, and Fibsy found a magnifying glass and looked carefully at certain pictures. "It proves," he said solemnly, "F. Stone, you have solved your greatest case." It was characteristic of the boy that although the solution was his own, his deference to Stone was sincere and unself-conscious. "Please," he said, "I don't know Latin, but you will find the explanation of Dr. Waring's death on that red-stained page. He was reading Martial, as we know, and—" he pointed to the epigram on the page in question, "as he read that, he found a way out." The grave statement was impressive, and Stone took the book. "Shall I translate or read the Latin aloud?" he asked the others. "Wait a minute. I'll get a Martial in English," Lockwood said, out of consideration for Trask's possible ignorance of the dead language. "What number is the epigram?" he asked, returning. Stone told him, and Lockwood found the place and passed the English version to Stone. Aloud, the detective read this: Translation. Book 4, Epigram 18. On a youth killed by the fall of a piece of ice. Just where the gate near the portico of Agrippa is always dripping with water, and the slippery pavement is wet with constant showers, a mass of water, congealed by winter's cold, fell upon the neck of a youth who was entering the damp temple, and when it had inflicted a cruel death on the unfortunate boy, the weapon melted in the warm wound it had made. What cruelties does not fortune permit? or where is not death to be found, if you, the waters, turn cutthroats? And so you see, Fibsy broke the ensuing silence, he decided to stab himself with an icicle, and he did. He did, he repeated triumphantly. He went to that window back by the big globe and got one, and here's the proof. Look through the glass, F.S. Stone did so, and without doubt, the fringe of icicles that hung from that particular window sash showed one missing. It was the very window that Nogi stated Waring had opened, and he had put his hand out of for a moment. Clearly he had broken off an icicle, strong and firm on that freezing night, had returned to his chair, and inspired by the story of the youth under the portico of Agrippa, had stabbed his own jugular vein with the sharp, round point, and had fallen unconscious. The icicle, melting in the wound, had disappeared, and death had followed in a moment or two. They went to the study, and Nogi was made to imitate the movements he saw Dr. Waring make. It left no doubt of the exact facts, and the mystery was solved. "Do you suppose he meant to make it seem a murder?" asked Stone thoughtfully. "He did not," defended Lockwood. "That is, he did not mean to implicate anybody. He was a man amenable to sudden suggestion, and apt to follow it. I am certain the idea came to him as he read his book, and in the impulse of the moment he rose, got the implement, and did the deed. It was like him to read that book after his talk with his daughter. He often resorted to reading for a time to clear his mind for some important decision. Had he not read that very page, he would in all probability not have taken his life at that time." "There can be no doubt of it all," said Stone. "Fibsy, the credit of the discovery is yours. You did a great piece of work." Fibsy blushed with delight at Stone's praise, which he cared for more than anything else in life, but he said, I just chanced on it. But I found out another thing. While I was working on that translatin' business, the telephone rang. I answered, but somebody took it on an extension, so I hung up. But I was waitin' quite a few minutes, and what do you think? I happened to rest my forehead on the telephone transmitter, and—" "The red ring!" cried Stone. "Of course." "Of course," Fibsy repeated. "Pokin' around for a Latin dictionary, I passed a lookin'-glass, and there on me noble forehead I saw a red ring, about 2 inches across. It's gone now." "Yes," Stone said. "Without doubt, Dr. Waring was telephoning, or perhaps was answering a call, and he rested his head on the instrument." "He often did that," said Lockwood, "but I never noticed a ring left." "In life," Stone said, "it would disappear quickly. But if it happened just before he died, rigor mortis would preserve the mark. Anyway, it must have been that." The solution of the mystery, so indubitably the true one, was accepted by the police. The matter was given as little publicity as possible, for Anita and Mrs. Bates, the two most deeply concerned, both wished it so. No stigma of cowardice rested on John Waring's name, for all who knew him knew that his act was the deed of a martyr to circumstances, and was prompted by a spirit of loyalty to his college and unwillingness to let his own misfortunes in any way redound to its disparagement. He trusted, they felt sure, that the truth would never be discovered, and that the tragedy of his death would preclude blame or censure. Himself he never thought of, in his unselfish life or equally unselfish death. Trask, perforce, resigned all claims to the estate, and Anita and her mother arranged matters between themselves. The assumption was that John Waring's will, which he burned, had been made in Mrs. Bates's favor, but on learning of his nearer heirs, he destroyed it. "Anita Waring," Lockwood murmured softly, when at last they were alone together. "I love the name," she said, "and it is really mine." "But it will be yours so short a time, it's scarcely worth while to use it," Gordon returned. "It will be a short time, won't it, sweetheart?" "Yes, indeed. I want to go away from Corinth forever. I love my father's memory, but I can't stand these scenes. I am tired of mystery in name and in deed. I just want to be Anita Lockwood." Whereupon Gordon lost his head entirely. End of Chapter 18. End of The Mystery Girl by Carolyn Wells. This recording has been by Roger Melin.